Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, before you vote, I need you to hear the full case. For 7 books, 2 decades, and what feels like a million heated fandom arguments, Severus Snape has been tried and convicted in the court of public opinion. Bully, villain, coward, the man who killed Dumbledore, the greasy-haired professor who made Harry Potter's life miserable from day one. On the surface, the prosecution's case looks airtight, but surface-level judgments only work if you never look deeper. Today, we are looking deeper. This is the formal defense of Severus Snape, built piece by piece, charge by charge, moment by moment. You will see what was hidden in plain sight, and by the end, I will argue, backed by canon, backed by Rowling's own words, backed by details you may have read a dozen times without registering their full weight, that Snape was never the man everyone thought he was. Court is in session. Charge 1. Snape was a bully. I'm not going to tell you he was a warm, nurturing educator. He wasn't. He terrorised Neville Longbottom, was vicious to Hermione, and made Harry's life in the dungeons genuinely miserable. The prosecution won't be wrong about any of that. But here is where the defence asks the jury to do something the prosecution never will. Look at what made him. Snape's story begins in Cokeworth. Born to an aggressive muggle father and a neglectful witch mother, he grew up in a cramped, dark house at Spinner's End, a dilapidated terrace in a rundown district of polluted rivers, factory chimneys, and broken street lamps. Canon strongly suggests Tobias was verbally, and possibly physically, abusive toward both his wife and son. This is not an excuse. This is context. When we ask why Snape became sharp-tongued, armoured, permanently on the offensive, we have to reckon with the boy who built those walls just to survive. The bully in the classroom didn't emerge from nowhere. He was built brick by brick in that house by that river, and then, in the middle of all that grey, something red-haired and bright walked into his life. Lily Evans was a muggle-born witch who lived nearby. Snape had spotted her doing accidental magic, and eventually worked up the nerve to introduce himself. The two became inseparable. Think about what that friendship meant to a child like Severus Snape. He had nothing. No warmth at home, no status, no comfort. Lily was the first person who treated him like he was worth something. She was, in every meaningful sense, his entire world before Hogwarts even began. Everything, every choice, every sacrifice, every terrible decision, and every quiet act of heroism traces back to that red-haired girl and the boy who loved her from the moment he saw her jump off a swing. Charge 2, and the one the prosecution loves most, Snape was a Death Eater. He joined Voldemort. Case closed, right? Not even close. At Hogwarts, Snape became the immediate enemy of James Potter and Sirius Black, and a frequent victim of their bullying. He developed a passion for the dark arts as his desire for revenge grew stronger. Here's what the prosecution glosses over. Snape didn't drift toward the dark arts out of pure malice. He drifted there because he was being systematically brutalized by the most popular boys in school, and the dark arts were the one place a clever, isolated half-blood kid felt powerful. That's an explanation of how radicalization works, and it is deeply, uncomfortably human. The hinge point came when James hoisted Snape upside down in front of the school, revealing his underwear. Lily came to his defense, and Snape, humiliated and furious, called her the unforgivable word mudblood. She walked away. He lost her, and in losing Lily, he lost the last thing keeping him anchored to anything decent. So yes, he joined the Death Eaters. He made the worst choice a person can make, but the prosecution wants you to treat that as the final verdict. The defense says it was the beginning of the longest, most painful road back. I want to pause and ask you something directly, because this is where the case gets genuinely complicated. If Snape had never called Lily that word, do you think their friendship would have survived his path into the Death Eaters? Or was the break inevitable? Comment your answer below, because this is the question that splits the fandom right down the middle, and I want to know where you stand. Back to the case. Charge 3. The accusation that Snape switched to Dumbledore's side was purely selfish, that he only turned because Lily was in danger. The prosecution isn't entirely wrong. Snape went to Dumbledore fearing Lily would be killed, and swore his allegiance in exchange for her protection. The defense concedes it. His initial motivation was Lily, not some abstract love of justice. But here's the question the jury needs to sit with. Does the purity of the motive determine the value of the act? Because what Snape did after Lily died, the life he committed himself to for the next 17 years, was not selfish. That was something else entirely. Being a double agent means waking up every single day knowing that one wrong word, one suspicious glance, one slip of the mask, and you are dead. Snape had to pretend to be loyal to evil people and put himself in constant danger without alerting his true allies that he was working for them. He did this for years, not weeks. Years. With no recognition, no safety net, and no guarantee it would ever end. He employed occlumency to hide his loyalty from Voldemort, and due to his well-known mastery, both sides had difficulty trusting him. The good side hated him. The bad side would have killed him if they'd known the truth. He existed in a permanent no-man's land, trusted by absolutely no one. Now, the Quidditch match in Philosopher's Stone. Harry's broom goes haywire. Hermione spots Snape muttering, eyes fixed on Harry. She assumes the worst, sets his robes on fire, the broom stabilizes. Snape was cursing Harry, right? Open and shut. Wrong. Quirrell revealed in Chapter 17 that Snape was muttering a counter-curse, not a hex. From page 1 of the very first book, the man everyone assumed was the villain was the one standing between Harry and death. Nobody noticed. Nobody thanked him. He just kept going. There's another moment almost nobody mentions when making the case for Snape. He introduced Harry to Expelliarmus, the spell that would eventually kill Lord Voldemort. Harry first saw Snape use it during Dueling Club in Chamber of Secrets, and over the ensuing years it became so associated with Harry that Lupin once called it his signature. The spell that ended Voldemort passed from Snape's hand to Harry's. If that's not poetic justice, I don't know what is. In Order of the Phoenix, Dumbledore tasks Snape with teaching Harry occlumency, sealing the mind against magical intrusion, because Voldemort was navigating Harry's dreams. Snape, the man Harry despises, the man who despises Harry right back, was chosen for this critical mission because he was the best at it. The lessons were brutal and ugly. They were also necessary, and Snape showed up for every single one. Now, the Astronomy Tower. This is where the prosecution rests its entire case. Snape killed Dumbledore in cold blood, with Harry watching. There is no coming back from that, except there is. Dumbledore was already dying. A curse from Marvolo Gaunt's ring, one of Voldemort's Horcruxes, was slowly killing him, a fact he kept hidden from most but not from Snape. Deathly Hallows confirmed he had mortally wounded himself the moment he put it on. By orchestrating his death at Snape's hands, Dumbledore ensured several outcomes. He protected Draco Malfoy, still a child forced into a position far beyond his maturity, and he elevated Snape's status within Voldemort's inner circle, a position that would ultimately aid Harry and the Order. Snape killed Dumbledore because Dumbledore asked him to. When Snape asked why Draco couldn't do it, Dumbledore answered, "That boy's soul is not yet so damaged. I would not have it ripped apart on my account." Dumbledore was willing to ask Snape to bear the weight of what looked like murder because he trusted Snape's soul could hold it. That is not the act of a villain. That is the act of a man who has committed himself so completely to a cause that he will absorb any cost, any accusation, any hatred, and keep going. Alone. Nobody knew. McGonagall chased Snape from the building thinking he was a traitor. The entire wizarding world thought he was a murderer. He walked out of Hogwarts that night carrying the weight of what he'd done, knowing he would never be able to explain it. That is not cowardice. That is the specific kind of courage that doesn't get songs written about it. The kind that operates in silence, at a cost you never get to tell anyone about, and then comes the final chapter. Chapter 33 of Deathly Hallows. A dying Snape gives Harry a stream of silver memories, and Harry watches the man's entire life rearrange itself in the pensive. The boy at Spinner's End, Lily walking away, Snape years later telling Dumbledore his Patronus is still a doe, the same as hers, and answering the headmaster's quiet question with a single word. Always. His Patronus, the magical manifestation of his deepest protective instinct, was a doe. Lily's Patronus, even his magic, even the unconscious shape of his soul was oriented toward her, toward protection, toward love. And even in his final year, headmaster of a school under Death Eater control, walking a razor's edge every single day, Snape was still guiding Harry toward victory. It was Snape's Patronus that led Harry to the icy pool in the forest, where Snape had secretly placed the sword of Gryffindor, the weapon capable of destroying Horcruxes. Without it, Harry could not complete his mission. Snape's actions were instrumental to the end. His last words were, "Look at me," so he could see Lily's eyes one final time. His last act was to look into the eyes of the boy he had protected for 17 years. The boy he had never been able to love easily, because every time he looked at Harry he saw James, the man who humiliated him, and Lily, the woman he had lost. And yet he protected Harry anyway, not because it was easy, because he had promised, because always is not a pretty word, it is a heavy one, and Snape carried it to the end. That weight was acknowledged. Harry named his son Albus Severus, and when the boy worried about being sorted into Slytherin, Harry told him, "You were named for 2 headmasters of Hogwarts. One of them was a Slytherin and he was probably the bravest man I ever knew." The boy Snape tormented. The boy Snape saved. That is the verdict, not from the internet, from Harry himself. Rowling described Snape as grey, with both saint-like and devil-like tendencies. The defence was never arguing for sainthood. Snape was a bully. He was cruel to children who didn't deserve it. He made choices early in his life that caused real, irreversible harm. The defence is not asking you to forget any of that. The defence is asking you to hold the whole picture. The neglected child in the ill-fitting clothes, the boy who found one bright thing in the world and watched it walk away, the man who chose, after the worst possible failure, to spend the rest of his life trying to make it right, in secret, in shadow, without thanks, without recognition, and ultimately without survival. The prosecution calls him a coward. The defence calls him a man who walked into the serpent's den every single day, armed with nothing but his wits and the quiet certainty of his purpose, and never flinched. The prosecution calls him a villain. The defence calls him a man who understood that doing the right thing and looking like the right person are not the same job, and chose the right thing anyway, even when it cost him everything. Snape was not the hero of the story. He was too broken, too sharp, too scarred for that. But he was essential to the hero's survival. He was the shadow that made the light possible, and every time the story needed someone to stand in the dark and hold the line, quietly, painfully, alone, Snape was there. The defence rests. If this video made you see Snape differently, or if you've always been in his corner, hit subscribe, because we go deep on these characters, and we are just getting started. And if you want the flip side, the full case for the prosecution, the argument that Snape's complexity doesn't redeem him, drop a comment and I will absolutely make it. The comment section is the courtroom now. I'll see you there.